Hello everyone, welcome to yours and my favorite part of the week. That's right, it is your Psych, Culture, and Society online course. And I'm here to walk you through the hottest topics in cross-cultural psychology. This week we're going to look at attraction and relationships. Let's jump into it. The theme of this chapter, independence slash interdependence and individualism slash collectivism all have a role in how people view attraction in relationships. So the question is, what does it mean to be attractive? Starting with appealing faces. Some characteristics of faces have been found to be universally appealing. Clear complexion, skin-free of blemishes, blotches, sores, and rashes is viewed as more attractive. Bilateral symmetry, identical right and left sides develop in ideal growing conditions. And average features. Facial features close to average in size and configuration are perceived to be the most attractive. That is average nose, eyes, and smile. Distance between the eyes as well. People are attracted to healthy-looking mates, perhaps because they are likely to produce offspring whose good health gives them the best possible chance of survival. This preference can come about unconsciously. So these are three features of attraction that we're going to talk about, as well as some theories underlying it, primarily focused on the survival of the species, evolution-based theories, but other ones as well. Clear complexion. Skin can be seen as a signal of health. Blemishes on the skin tend to signal poor health and possibly the presence of parasites or diseases. In the, quote, ancestral environment, the complexion was used to estimate the health of a potential mate, leading to a common preference for a clear complexion. There's evidence that people prefer a clear complexion. Studies have found strong agreement worldwide that clear complexion is more attractive than skins with blotches, sores, and rashes. So again here, this theoretical indicator of health, possibly being the rashes or sores on your face, and thus not the individual with those signs on their face, possibly being used as a heuristic for the overall health of an individual and thus the survivability of their offspring. Another marker of health is bilateral symmetry. Identical right and left sides develop in ideal growing conditions. Genetic mutations, pollution, pathogens, and stresses in the womb can lead to unbalanced or asymmetrical development and potentially to ill health. On average, asymmetrical faces are viewed as less attractive. Preference for bilateral symmetry is seen even in non-humans such as scorpion flies. So some evidence across multiple species, and the idea here is similar as the previous slide, wherein asymmetrical faces could be used as a heuristic of genetic mutations, exposure to nuclear waste from pollution, for example, or just coal fire or something along those lines, or other prenatal stress, which may reduce the lifespan of an individual and also potentially make them ideally not a preferred partner because they may die early, they may be incapable of contributing to some hypothetical group, or raising their offspring, or giving, have a possibly higher likelihood of giving birth to a child who dies early on in their lifespan. Average features. Facial features close to average in size and configuration are perceived to be more attractive than faces that deviate from the average. Examples such as average size nose, eyes, and smile. Possible reasons for this preference for the average. People with average features are less likely to have abnormalities, reflecting good genetic health. Easier to mentally process things that resemble a prototype. We can process any kind of stimulus that is closer to a prototype more easily than one that is further from a prototype, which includes faces. Easy processing is associated with a pleasant feeling that is interpreted as attractive. This operates through the same mechanism as the mere exposure effect. That is, we like familiar stimuli due to their ease of processing. So consistent with previous slides, this theoretical ability to reproduce, or just a heuristic of good biological health. But also this gets at the classic arguments that you're we're exposed to probably, hopefully, and general psychology, and that's the brain is lazy. So we have kind of these heuristics. We want to process things at the least amount of effort as possible. So that's kind of the idea here underlying this argument for a reason for preference for averages, and that is it's easier. It's the prototype. It's which means because it's so familiar and so common, and it's the most theoretically simplest stimuli to process, in this case a face, the brain, some kind of unconscious level, interprets this easeability of processing as attraction. And kind of some studies have suggested that the ease of processing is associated with pleasant feelings, and which then can be interpreted as attraction. Attraction of the average does not apply beyond facial features to the perception of bodies. Average bodies in terms of weight, height, muscles, hips are not necessarily considered the most attractive. For these, bodies that depart from the average are seen as more attractive. Preferred body weights vary considerably across cultures, so there is no universally agreed upon preference for body weight. Thin female bodies, however, are idolized in Western culture. If we took clues exclusively from the common image of the thin woman that is seen in the media in the West, we might be tempted to think that thinness is a universal marker of attractiveness. These ideals for thinner women have been more prevalent during the past few decades, while actual average body weights have increased. Heavier female bodies are a standard of beauty in many non-Western cultures, and in the past in Western cultures. The standard of beauty was also a heavier body weight. In 1951, anthropologists studied beauty standards in the U.S. and cultures in the rest of the world and concluded that heavier women were universally found to be more attractive. Culturally, this may be exemplified by the fact that in Western Africa, the term, quote, fat is often viewed as a compliment indicating strength and beauty. Many African cultures apply the idea that a heavy body is the most attractive to both men and women, and within the United States, Black Americans prefer a heavier body weight than do white Americans. So here we have a kind of historical effect with shifts in the ideal beautiful body in the United States, but also differences across culture within the United States cross-culturally, but also internationally with the majority of the rest of the world concluding that heavier women were found to be more attractive. However, this was in 1951, and as kind of the spread of American culture spreads across the world, you might be expected to see shifts in these preferences for heavier women, in some countries at least, to thin female bodies, which again had also underwent a shift, but kind of more recently, and as stated, the past few decades, with a more prevalence and kind of more media advertisements for thinner women being the ideal, with the spread of like American cultural hegemony across the world, you would expect to see kind of shifts in that as well. And some studies have found that in Asian cultures as well. Mechanisms of attraction. How do people become drawn to each other? There are two potential mechanisms that we'll cover: propinquity effect and similarity attraction effect. People are more likely to become friends with those with whom they meet more frequently, and this is known as the propinquity effect. The propinquity effect operates due to the mere exposure effect. That is, the more we are exposed to a stimulus, the more we become attracted to it, because it becomes familiar to us. There's evidence that this is a culturally universal effect, for example, in both Japanese and Americans. The effect generalizes to also non-human animals. Chickens will be most attracted to other chickens that they are exposed to the most. And there are all kinds of classic studies of this, with school-aged children kind of being more likely to be friends with people whose last name is closer to them in the alphabet, because you can imagine that teachers sort their seating chart based on last names, for example, so kind of just repeated exposure, increasing the likelihood of becoming friends, but also being linked to the level of attraction that individuals have for each other due to this similar exposure effect. The similarity affection effect. People are attracted to those who are most like themselves. Stronger possibility of friendship and romantic relationship when both people are similar in attitudes, personality, religion, social background, economic level, and attitudes. It is a powerful and reliable predictor of relationship development. However, it is not a universal effect. Whereas chickens show the propinquity in mere exposure effect, they do not seem to show this similarity attraction effect. In humans, this effect seems limited to Western cultures. There is evidence of cultural variability, strong in cultures with high relational mobility. And we'll get to reviewing relational mobility later on in the lecture. But kind of this is the classic idea of birds of a feather stick together mantra, or whatever the other opposite version of that saying is. And, what is more true? And typically in Western cultures, we see kind of birds of a feather slip together or flock together. Wherein individuals who have similarities have a stronger possibility of becoming friends and developing romantic relationships with each other. However, this is not consistently seen across cultures. And why does this difference in cultures exist? The similarity attraction effect seems to be restricted to Western samples. The Japanese did not demonstrate this effect. In another study, perceived similarity of a target strongly predicted how much someone liked it in a Canadian sample, but this perceived similarity was not related to how much someone liked it in a Japanese sample. Other studies also found a strong similarity attraction effect in North Americans than in Japanese. Why do you think these differences exist? Potential relationship with a self-enhancement motive. So kind of the idea here in Western culture is that we're kind of trying to promote not just our individuality, but the traits that we have are thought to possibly reflect something like inherently good, or we're also trying to pursue our own interests. So someone who has similar interests to us in our pursuit of individuality and kind of maximizing our happiness and full potential, someone who has similar goals and attitudes and overall background reflects will reflect your own background, which is kind of a way of kind of acting as like a multiplier of your efforts to act upon the world and pursue your own goals. That's self-enhancement. And at the same time kind of offer evidence that what your goals are, what your background are, or what kind of with your attitudes and approach to the world are, political, economic, etc., are correct. And so kind of giving you a reaffirmation of your personality, which in Western cultures are thought to be kind of that inner, as stated in previous chapters, so kind of those inner attributes that are unmovable. So kind of that reflection, that validation through another person having similar backgrounds and attitudes and approaches to the world is of validating in individuals pursuing their own goal in Western cultures. All relationships are based on one or more of the four basic elements of sociality: communal sharing, authority ranking, equality matching, market pricing. Next, we're going to review all four of these in more detail. Communal sharing. Members of a group emphasize their common identity rather than their differences. Everyone is treated equally and has the same rights and privileges. Resources tend to be pooled for use by everyone. They are available to the entire group for the greater good, rather than being distributed on the basis of merit. No one person deserves more of the resources than others. An example is members of the family. So this is not super common in the West, as evident that in the United States, it's typically proud of and promotes the idea of a meritocracy and the kind of justification, the ethical nature of a meritocracy, wherein individuals, this is typically seen in higher ed, where individuals who are in the highest degrees kind of get distributed disproportionately higher amounts of resources, economic resources, and really social resources now than individuals who may have just like a high school diploma, for example. However, there are examples of this in the Western culture, such as the family, wherein you can kind of see where there are higher levels of people being treated equally and kind of pooling resources together for the good of their common identity. Equality matching. Social structure based on balance and reciprocity. Records are kept to keep track of what is exchanged. People are motivated to work in turns to pay back what has been exchanged. This is a turn-based social structure. This structure is not as common in the Western cultures, but quite common in many other cultures worldwide. Rotating credit association in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. That is, on a fixed schedule, each family in a tribe contributes an equal amount of money to a pool, and one family takes the entire pool of money. Each family gets a turn, so every few years, each family gets some extra money because of the pool. Other examples include exchanging Christmas cards, carpools, reciprocal dinner invitations, and treating people to lunch. So again, not super common in Western cultures, but quite common in other parts of the world. Here you're pulling resources together, but it's more based on, I should add, it's additionally based on balance and reciprocity. So kind of there is records are kept to keep track of whose turn it is. That's kind of a turn-based social structure. And kind of the idea here is that, as stated, pulling resources together, and then every few years, everybody gets a nice little jump in bonus. So you get a kind of holiday bonus where you get extra, food, money, etc., whatever goods are being pulled together. However, there are examples in Western cultures, such as carpools and reciprocal dinner invitations. So going out to eat with your friends, and one time somebody pays for your meal, and then kind of in the future someone else pays the meal, or for the meal, and kind of just over time, just to kind of balance out. And once in a while you get a little bonus where you get to eat for free. Market pricing. A social structure that also emphasizes balance and reciprocity, but is based on proportionality and ratios. Benefits are exchanged on a single dimension, usually money. Similar to equality matching in that people expect to receive something equivalent to what they contributed, but unlike equality matching, the exchange in a market pricing structure usually occurs at once, and different kinds of goods can be exchanged. An example of this is usually the buying and selling in the marketplace, so getting a bag of coffee in exchange for a sack of flour, or buying a used laptop for $100 on eBay. So as stated, similar to the equality matching, however, this is typically based in a single dimension money as stated, and it's much more transactional and on a single kind of transactional level. So literally, this is just operating in the marketplace. I give X amount of money for Y amount of goods. So you're not getting this, everybody pulls their thing together and then once in a while everybody gets a bonus. It's rather these kind of individual exchanges within a marketplace wherein we are expect to receive something for the equivalent amount of money that we provide, which whatever, money representing labor from a job or whatnot. So you're putting in labor, theoretically, to earn money, and then exchanging that labor, that contribution, theoretically, to society in exchange for goods, which also took X amount of labor and time to produce. So kind of a direct marketplace exchange. All relationships should encompass one or more of these components or structures. All four models operate in relationships in all cultures. There are cultural variability, however. While these four social structures are universal, there is cultural variability in the extent to which each operates. Market pricing is most common in individualistic cultures, and equality matching is emphasized more in traditional subsistence societies. And this is kind of straightforward. We live in a set of markets, a marketplace. We interact with markets constantly. We're consumers, and we exchange money for goods within a market because we live in an individualistic kind of capitalist society. Relational mobility. Cultures also vary in the amount of freedom people have to move between relationships. The key difference between high and low relational mobility is the basis for starting and maintaining relationships. High relational mobility. cultural contexts in which people have flexible ties and many opportunities to form new connections. Relationships are more determined by choice than in low relational mobilities. The default state between two people is no relationship, and people opt into a relationship on a mutually voluntary basis. Both people in partnerships motivated to behave in ways that strengthen their mutual commitment because they both have more options or other options. They're more common in Latin America, North America, and Western Europe than elsewhere in the world. Low relational mobility, cultural contexts in which people have few opportunities to form new relationships and are bound by commitment and obligations to existing ones. The relationships and contexts with low relational mobility primarily are determined by circumstances, such as born into a family with its network of relatives. Relationships are a fact of life, that is, it is the default state, and whether someone likes or is attracted to others are less important. They're more common in the East and Southeast Asia, North and West Africa, and the Middle East. And this connects to many concepts that we've discussed throughout this course. The individual acting in their own interest, having kind of that, if you remember going back to the schematic, the personality schematic, having that solid line around themselves, being kind of unaffected by relationships with others. Thus, they're operating in the world independently from other people. The default state is not in relationships. So when individuals in these high relational mobility cultural contexts, commonly found as stated in North America and Western Europe, and also in Latin America, interact with someone and choose to become in a relationship, it's a voluntary basis. Because they're acting individually, they're unaffected, or less affected, I should say, by other relationships around them, and thus people bounce in and out of that in-group much more easier than in low relational mobility cultural context. This theoretically can increase the motivation to act in ways that are familiar to other people, because and possibly even increase that similarity effect, because people are not bound to these relationships. There are many options, and people make friends and leave friends much more easily or frequently in these high relational mobility cultural contexts. Versus low relational mobility context, wherein the default state is kind of being in a relationship. You're connected to others. Your identity is connected to others. Your personality is connected to others, and thus you're just more bound to others. And that social bond requires fulfilling obligations to other peoples, and it involves quite a large commitment to other people, because everybody is shaped and impacted by the relationship of others. Therefore, there are fewer opportunities to form new relationships for many reasons. But one of the reasons, obviously, is that it's just a lot of work, and there's a lot on the line by either leaving a group or adding other people to your in-group. There's evidence that people in societies that are high in relational mobilities tend to have a higher quantity of friends than people in societies that are low in relational mobility. People who have low relational mobility tend to be more cautious with their friends and are more likely to perceive friendships as being associated with social obligations. Because relationships in societies that are high in relational mobility can act like a marketplace in which people are free to look for new ones, attractiveness is an important factor. Societies that have low relational mobility, signs of attractiveness play less of a role because relationships are generally relatively stable and few new relationships are struck. So I covered a bunch of possible reasons why in the previous slide, but also those reasons are manifest themselves in the evidence that societies with high relational mobilities have higher quantities of friends. And you can imagine why, because those low relational mobilities, those interdependent societies, those collectivist societies, as I stated, a lot are on the lines. There's a lot of social obligations associated with friendships. However, in more individualistic, high relational mobility cultural contexts, there's kind of less on the line of being in an in-group and out-group. Therefore, you can have a higher quantity of friends because it's it's really not that much more of a social obligation to have these kind of acquaintances existing in the world. You can imagine someone on Facebook having thousands of friends. They're not hanging out with that person, but rather it's kind of just like a maybe slight acquaintances that you maybe see a few posts from, for example, once in a while. Much research, which has largely been conducted with Westerners, has found an enhanced value of attractiveness. Physically attractive people receive many other kinds of benefits and are considered to have more desirable characteristics, an effect known as, quote, the tyranny of the beautiful. Examples: more attractive children are rated as smarter and better behaved by their teachers than less attractive children, and more attractive people with MBA degrees earn more money than their less attractive peers. This is assumed to be due to the halo effect, association of physical attractiveness with other positive traits and attributes. But are these benefits universal? So kind of as I stated before, with people arguing that there's kind of a thought to be an evolutionary advantage or kind of a heuristic for evolutionary advantage with attractiveness or faces that are symmetrical. There's also kind of heuristics that people use for attractiveness, in the West at least, that individuals who are more attractive kind of thought to have these other attributes that are associated with attractiveness. So attractiveness representing kind of just like golden standard. Thus, this person who's really attractive is also going to be thought of as smarter, better behaved, and deserving of more resources. But the question is, as I stated, are these benefits universal? As stated, most of this research has been conducted in context with high relational mobility in North America. This effect may not be observed in context with low relational mobility. A study in 2008 found that more attractive Americans reported greater satisfaction with their lives and friendships than less attractive Americans. More attractive Ghanaians reported lower satisfaction with their general life outcomes and friendships than less attractive Ghanaians. Similar findings emerged comparing attractive urban women with higher relational mobility to rural women with lower relational mobility on measures of well-being. Overall, the emphasis on attractiveness in societies that have high relational mobility also shows evidence of the tyranny of beautiful. That is, more physically attractive people having better life outcomes and well-being. However, this pattern is not found in societies with low relational mobility. And as I talked about in the previous slide, kind of the idea here that low relational mobility societies, attractiveness playing less of a role because their relationships, that in-group is more stable and few new relationships are struck, so therefore kind of this idea of attractiveness and competing on the marketplace for social relationships occurs at far lower rates because of the importance of the in-group and interdependence versus kind of this individual highly mobile or high relational mobility where you have a lot of friends, and there's more emphasis on attractiveness because you can voluntarily leave at any time, any relationship, so you can therefore seek out any social relationship you want, and kind of social relationships in general just being more fluid because of less dependency on social relationships and social obligations, to less of an impact of those social relationships to an individual's pursuit of their individual goals. Somewhat related to relational mobility is the idea of residential mobility, that is, the extent to which people physically move to different places of residence. Residential mobility can predict some very interesting cultural differences, and I'll review very quickly some of the studies in this slide and in the next slide. College students who have high residential mobility tend to display more conditional loyalty to their college. They, like their college, only when people say good things about them. Communities with high residential mobility are more likely to be fair-weather sports fans. Attendance is closely tied to the team's performance, whereas people in residentially stable communities attend sports events even when their teams are losing. And you can imagine why. For kind of the team example, you're in that community, you have low residential mobility, you're not going anywhere, therefore you kind of have a much more a higher rate of kind of connection to that sports team, that's local, that's thought to maybe represent your cultural values, and you are going to be there forever. So, or you have a higher likelihood of being in that area forever and leaving. So those strong community ties are reflective in your kind of social relationship to and commitment to your hypothetical sports team versus an individual who has high residential mobility or a kind of a city that has a high residential mobility cultural context where people are from all kinds of different areas. They are not as committed to that team because it's obviously not reflective of them. They don't have a deep identity or stable identity with that sports team. Thus, I'm not going to root for that garbage team when they suck. I'm going to go do something else because it just makes me feel like crap watching my team get punked out every day. Unlike real fans like me who will watch the entirety, every game of this Orlando Magic 15-win, 20-win season coming up. People with high residential mobility tend to prefer large national chain stores, which are the same wherever you go, over local regional stores. People who are high in residential mobility in general are also more likely to view personality as being a more central part of their identity than group membership, because personality is more immediately apparent on meeting a person, but group membership requires more time to get to know others. There are economic consequences of residential mobility in that people with higher residential mobility tend to have better employment opportunities than people who don't want to move away. Over generations, families with lower residential mobility tend to remain poorer. So kind of just to expand on this a little bit with the high residential mobility group membership points. So you can imagine that individuals in high relational mobility, but also high residential mobility, traveling around, meeting multiple people, not having a big or like a huge or relatively strong compared to low residential mobility and low relational mobility social obligation to individuals that they meet. And they kind of view themselves as acting as actors in a marketplace, individual to individual interacting with each other. And therefore kind of view, one, you want to identify people who are similar to you in these Western contexts. And also it's just kind of easier and quicker to evaluate someone's personality than group membership because you're kind of moving around. You're kind of you're less effective or unaffected by group memberships. You're just an individual acting in a social marketplace, and therefore group membership is irrelevant, and it's kind of too much effort to understand or kind of go into the depth that's required to understand group membership, where versus I could just look at someone, this person is loud, this person is extroverted, this person is whatever personality trait, and again, in these contexts, people would imagine these personality traits as these stable inner characteristics that reflect who a person is across all social scenarios. So therefore, I just evaluate that quick personality trait, and then I can then decide how much social bonds I make with that individual. And you could expect to see that kind of approach to increase in the West as group membership has continued to decline and kind of just community activity has continued to decline throughout the United States, not just kind of church membership, but also kind of union membership or just really any kind of collective notions of community declining across the U.S. for decades now. And as is stated for kind of the final bullet point, residential mobility and people with higher residential mobility having better opportunities. One possible reason for this is, we are all aware of kind of like those cities, those hubs where there are highly concentrated with like tech jobs, for example, and where rents become sky high, but also the wages are like higher than much of the super majority of the landmass of the country. So kind of those small pockets of highly that are loaded with relatively higher amounts of employment opportunities, kind of taking individuals who have high residential mobilities, having the opportunity to leave behind their neighborhood where they grew up or where they were born, and then participate in that competitive marketplace, wherein there are just a finite amount of jobs with a bunch of people going there. So just the idea that you can be mobile, providing an individual with a more opportunity to compete in that marketplace. And you can see this across the United States, these trends where there's huge swaths of just kind of poverty, really. Huge swaths of just kind of very unstable marketplaces, little job opportunities across much of the United States. But then there's these pockets of relatively higher employment opportunities where the wages are. And then the people who are left behind in their cities are kind of relatively less well off. And over time, that'll contribute to generations of poverty. But also kind of like the suburbanization effect, wherein, because as stated, highly residential mobility, people prefer those large national chains. You see these large national chains kind of just matriculate into and kind of develop and create kind of this monoculture that's in pockets throughout the United States. And while other low residential mobility countries or areas remaining poorer, having local regional stores, and just kind of having less kind of capital investment in general. Enemyship, or it could be known as frenemies, R.I.P. Trish Paytas. One study showed that 71% of Ghanaians participants said that they had enemies, compared to only 26% of American participants. Americans who had enemies were more likely to view enemies as coming from the outside their group, such as ethnic prejudice against their group. Ghanaians were more likely than Americans to say that their enemies were coming from in-groups, such as neighbors, friends, and relatives. So this study found kind of a massive difference in the idea of where your enemy is coming from, with Americans viewing their enemies more from the outside group versus, in this sample, Ghanaians viewing their enemies from their in-groups. And let's talk a little bit more about that. For the independent view of self, which is more characteristic of Americans, the self is generally disconnected from other people. Generally, more relational mobility, freedom for people to choose the relationships in which they want to engage. With this perspective, it's easier for people to disengage from people even if they're in the in-group. And it's also easier for them to form relationships with new people. Americans say they don't have enemies because they avoid people they don't like. By avoiding these people who are problematic relationships with someone, Americans try not to develop any relationships with people they don't like. So enemyship won't develop. So kind of this idea, because I'm relational, I have a high amount of relational mobility, aka the self is not affected by these other groups. This in-group has less of an impact on my inner true self. I'm stable, and I'm at pursuits of my own individual goals. I'm not going to take the time to deal with people that are annoying me in my in-group. I can disengage, I can move on, I can form new relationships, because really just less is on the line. So therefore, people in my in-group are typically not going to be the dominant place where my quote-unquote enemies lie. They're going to be my out-group, because I just filter out people that I don't like out of my in-group. With an interdependent view of self, which is more characteristic of Ghanaians, the self is intertwined within a web of relationships. Generally, less relational mobility, people have less ability to choose a relationship in which they engage. People often have little choice in the people with whom they are affiliated with. As a result, there are people within their groups with whom the individual does not get along, perhaps even to the point of being enemies. Relationships are viewed as being stable, and they see themselves as having little ability to form new relationships. So kind of in this phase, we have an interdependent view of self. I'm connected to other people. These in-groups, my in-group is very valuable to me, has a large impact on my life, and it's very difficult to leave this group or kick someone out of that in-group. Therefore, you're going to have people around you who might be a bit more annoying to you, or possibly be your enemy. Because you have kind of less fluidity in which you can move in and out of these social groups. Varieties of friendships. Friendship is universal, but the nature and meaning of friendships varies. Americans have more friends than people in other cultures. American adults have an average social network size of about 21, compared to 13 for Hong Kong Chinese adults, and about 13 for German adults. Americans are more open to forming new friends. known for seemingly friendly on first encounters and being open to sharing personal stories with others, even if they don't intend to ever see them again. Giving unsolicited advice, common in collectivist cultures, such as Turkey and Colombia. In Russia, people are more likely to give unsolicited advice, whereas Americans gave advice depending on whether it was requested. Ghanaians perceive friendship as involving more obligation than Americans do. May explain why Ghanaians feel more cautious about friendships than Americans. So, kind of the idea here is that because, as we previously stated, having Americans having a higher quantity of friends because of the nature and the meaning of friendships vary, and in this highly relational, mobile, individualistic context, kind of being associated with a larger quantity of social network size. And Americans being more open to forming new friends, and this is a classic kind of stereotype of Americans, wherein they meet someone for the first time, and they just start sharing, talking a lot, or kind of vocal, and it's thought to reflect the fact of this, again, this high mobility, this high relational mobility, and kind of their own individual pursuits, wherein kind of they're sharing themselves. It's not really, they really don't believe that kind of their sharing themselves is really going to impact that other person. They're just kind of self-expression is very important, and the likelihood that you don't see this person really not having, or not ever seeing this person again, really not having a large impact on your willingness to share personal details about yourself. And kind of relatedly, in the U.S., Americans give advice depending on whether it's requested. So if you imagine a person as kind of an individual and a collection of individuals, me interfering in that person's life could interrupt their individual pursuit of their goals, versus more in collectivist societies having a higher likelihood of giving unsolicited advice. Simpatico. Friendships differ in how people present themselves to others. Simpatico, highly valued relational style in Latin American cultures that emphasizes maintaining harmonious relationships and making expressive displays of graciousness, hospitality, and congeniality. Achieving this state is viewed as an end in itself. Latin American self-concept is characterized by traits reflecting simpatico, such as it being easygoing, respectful, courteous, and agreeable. Leads to generally smoother social interactions and more positive social interactions compared to interactions among white Americans, which do not strive for simpatico as a goal. Latin Americans tend to act in more sociable ways than white Americans and spend more time socializing with others. Examples of how a culture can have a prescribed presentation of the self in social contexts, consisting of a set of traits that people strive to achieve in social interactions. So as stated, this is a highly hospitable and gracious relational style that's kind of into itself. This simpatico seeks to, as stated, kind of seek out or develop, and the design purpose is to lead to kind of these smooth, easygoing social relationships based on hospitality, graciousness, kind of acting in courteous, agreeable, in kind of smooth, easygoing ways. And kind of the idea here is that you can see that cultures, these cultural values, at these macro level values, impacting the self, and that is individuals' a sense of self striving to achieve these social dynamics within cultural context. So these larger cultural values kind of trickling down to how individuals interact and what their goals are in a particular social context, and also kind of just how you present yourself to other people within that cultural context. And that is kind of in more of a Western idea, what kind of sets of traits, those personality traits you're presenting to other people within a given social context. And those specific traits are presented to achieve a particular social goal. Why does love exist? From an evolutionary perspective, romantic love is an evolutionary adaptation to ensure that children have adequate resources and protection, With human babies being so vulnerable for so long, parents needed to stay together to provide the resources necessary to raise, support, and protect the child. Romantic love involved as a way to bind the couple together. There is evidence that romantic love is universal. There is clear evidence of romantic love was found in 89% of 166 cultures, according to a review of ethnographies. Not clear evidence in 11% of cultures, but in all but one, sexual affairs occurred, suggesting that they experienced romantic love as its impossible motivation for affairs. Cultural variation and element of love relationships: intimacy, feelings of closeness and connection; passion, physical attraction and sexual desire; and commitment, decision to maintain the loving relationship. So as stated, kind of the idea here is that humans have been very long developmental process compared to other human or other animals, and even compared to other primate species. And this kind of elongated development could make romantic love evolutionarily benefit for optimal development within offspring. And there is evidence, as I stated, that across cultures, romantic love is consistently found. And even in the cultures that are basically 99% of cultures where it wasn't found, there were still signs of people committing sexual affairs, which kind of suggests some romantic love or some kind of at least passion associated with relationships within that culture. And although a romantic love or kind of love relationships kind of more generally are found across cultures, they vary in the amounts of three specific components of love, and that is intimacy, passion, and commitment. Beginning with intimacy, cultures vary in the amount of intimacy that people express and share. Western couples experience more intimacy, especially in self-disclosure, than East Asian couples. Acculturated East Asians and Mexicans engage in more self-disclosure than those who are less acculturated. They confide in their partners more and reveal more to them. People in some non-Western cultures may have intimacy needs met by others in their social network. For example, Ghanaians and Taiwanese are more likely to prioritize the needs of their mother ahead of those of their spouse. Relational mobility is a key predictor of intimacy in close relationships in terms of self-disclosure. In contexts with high relational mobility, people need to invest more in their existing relationships if they want them to last, and self-disclosure helps to do that. Confiding one's romantic partner is essential to intimacy among Westerners, but self-confiding disclosure may be less of a necessity for romantic intimacy outside the West as compared to values such as kindness, which is a key predictor of relationship success across diverse cultures. So as I stated, self-disclosure is more common in Western contexts, and you can see this in immigrants to the United States or Western contexts in general, where East Asians and Mexicans, the more acculturated they are, the higher rates of self-disclosure that they participate in. One potential reason for this is that in cultures with high relational mobilities, again, kind of the idea you can have a lot of friendships, you're competing in a marketplace, attractiveness matters, and you have endless options. You can move, and theoretically, there's a correlation between high residential mobility, so you're moving around a lot. Therefore, you kind of need something to make that relationship stick. So you need to invest more in your relationships, and one way to do so and kind of demonstrate the commitment is through self-disclosure. However, there could also just be differences in the types of intimacy displayed, with non-Western cultures having acts of kindness being more prevalent or consequential to the relationships, the likelihood of success within a relationships in non-Western cultures. And this could theoretically be related to kind of self-disclosure. So, like, you're trying to explain to the person that you're in a relationship with who you are as an individual, and kind of revealing yourself to another person to make yourself more vulnerable or whatever, versus kind of an act of kindness. Wherein those traits are less thought to be reflective of kind of, again, that inner essence. So kind of these acts of kindness demonstrates a example and commitment and kind of fulfillment of that social obligation and that social commitment to another individual, in this case your intimate partner. Feelings of passion may be universal in romantic relationships, but they may not play as strong a role everywhere. Westerners report high passion for their romantic partner than East Asians, and relationship satisfaction is based more on passion among Westerners than among East Asians. For example, American participants report stronger feelings of passionate love than Japanese participants, and also score higher on relational mobility. Stronger passion may be partially emerged from increased opportunities to form new relationships outside a current one. Passionate love can serve as a bond to keep couples together, and this bond needs to be stronger when parents or partners have more opportunity to seek out other relationships. So because of this, so kind of similar stated before, kind of operating with much more options, you need something to bond individuals together, and this passion can kind of serve as kind of a glue to keep partners together. But also, but also passion is maybe universal, but kind of the idea here is that the extent to which it is foundational to the likelihood of success to a relationship varies across culture, with Westerners, as stated, reporting higher passion for the romantic partnership, but not just that, but that relationship satisfaction was based more on passion among Westerners than among East Asians. And we talked about in the previous lecture kind of more of the idea of more of a tranquil, balanced state among individuals within East Asian cultures, so this could also be kind of reflected in romantic partnerships as well. Commitment. There's cultural variation in commitment. Feelings of commitment were stronger in Asia than the West, and among Asian Canadians who identify with their heritage culture than those who did not. This may reflect a lower relational mobility in Asian cultures. The divorce rates correlate with individualism in a country and with relational mobility. Canadians are more likely to idolize their partners than Japanese, and more likely to base their commitment on idolization. Idolization of romantic partners appears more pronounced in Western cultures. So typically, divorce rates are correlated with individualism, so kind of just one marker of commitment, and in in countries that have higher rates of individualism and countries with higher rates of relational mobility. So, and commitment kind of in general being found to be stronger in Asian context. And even within Asian individuals that live in Western settings but identify more with their Asian background than their Canadian background in this example. So we have kind of higher rates of passion and also kind of higher rates of intimacy through self-disclosure in the West, but kind of higher also rates of divorce and lower rates of commitment than in East Asian cultures. And these divorce rates and this kind of commitment also can be reflective in or kind of implicated in the types of marriages that are found across the world. And what are some of those types of marriage found across the world? Well, in the United States, there are 3 phases in the functions of marriage. So at first, the majority supported themselves through herding and farming, and marriage reflected kind of the circumstances of those of kind of agrarian requirements. The latter part of the 19th century, people moved from rural areas to urban centers engaged in wage labor. Marriage became less rule-bound and more compassionate, with the primary purpose redefined as fulfilling psychological and emotional needs for belonging, companionship, love, and passion. In the 1960s, women pursued higher education and careers while taking charge of their sexuality through improved contraception. Marriage became a vehicle for self-expression, personal growth, and strong identity through personal fulfillment. Americans are turning to their romantic partners more for personal fulfillment now than before. One reason could be because they have smaller networks of confidants than in the past, with 10% fewer close friends in 2000 compared to 2 decades prior. So we kind of see different phases of marriage, and this is kind of getting at the importance of the historical era when considering these psychological constructs. With kind of herding agrarian societies, marriage reflecting those circumstances, so kind of either families joining each other, pooling resources, kind of less residential mobility, and marriage kind of be reflective in those environmental constraints, those economic and political constraints. And then as 19th century, kind of the as we approach industrialization, people moving from rural areas to urban areas to engage in wage labor, kind of the onset of industrial capitalism as stated. Marriage becomes more fluid and needed more for compassion, because now we have kind of individual actors operating much more so in this this marketplace. This, as we talked about in the previous lecture, kind of this idea of the Enlightenment, this predictable marketplace wherein we can pursue our own personal happiness as individual actors within a marketplace for jobs, but also kind of due to this higher residential mobility, kind of just picking where I want to live, and thus also having higher relational mobility, so kind of this social marketplace as well. And then finally, kind of in the 1960s, with the distribution and more kind of acceptability of contraception within the United States, but also more globally, and women entering or being permitted to enter university settings and different careers. Now they are also participating in this in their own marketplace, kind of their own. They're able to participate not just kind of in that industrial capitalism, even though kind of industrialization was going down here, but kind of just in this marketplace more generally, this economic marketplace. But now with the more widespread use of contraception, the legality of contraception and abortion, they can now kind of express themselves more and individually determine how they are going to participate within this social marketplace themselves. So it's kind of just women also kind of joining this social marketplace and kind of being more prevalent and higher up the economic marketplace as well. And as I said in previous slides, although Western cultures and kind of Americans more specifically having larger quantity of social networks, the quality of the social network has decreased. And that specifically what I'm referring to here is that there's a smaller network of confidants than in the past. And this is just in 2000, and this trend has continued in the past 20 years. And this can be reflected in just social relationships declining, as I stated, these group memberships declining in the United States, but also as individualism has become more and more prevalent within society, and thus individuals turning to their romantic partners at higher rates for personal fulfillment, but also kind of as social support. And then an interesting question comes as marriage rates declines and as kind of birth rates decline, and necessarily marriage doesn't mean not a romantic partnership, but kind of the traditional romantic partnership, or at least of the last about 100 and something years, as that declines, and at the same time as group membership declines, what does that mean for individual social development and health outcomes associated with that potential decrease? And we see a decrease in smaller and confidants, but maybe an additional decrease as these social networks found within the immediate family decreases at the same time as group membership decreases as well. And then finally, you can see, as I kind of already outlined, but you can see that this idea of marriage, like for love and happiness, is a very recent phenomenon, existing only within the last, about 200 or so years in the United States. Or I should say, as kind of the basis or the predominant feature of marriage is relatively common, or I should say relatively recent phenomenon within the United States, and marriage kind of just in general. And given that recent historical development, you would expect romantic relationships and love marriages to not be universal. And they're not. The idea of marriage as being based on romantic love is not universal. Arranged marriages are those arranged by families rather than the couples themselves. Historically, they have made up the majority of marriages worldwide. Arranged marriages have been common in many cultures. The percentage has been dropping recently in many cultures, including China. India, Japan, Turkey, and among Orthodox Jews. Half of Indian and Pakistani participants reported they should marry someone with the desirable qualities even if they were not in love. Less than 5% of Americans, Australians, and Latin Americans said that they would. Common in cultures with strong extended family ties. Powerful feelings of romantic love, such as intense mutual absorption in a couple, could be seen as irrelevant or even disruptive in cultures with large kinship networks, given that those feelings might interfere with a person's ability to respect family members' wishes. Some have argued that social pressures from an extended family system keep a relationship together. Without social pressure from the family, romantic love may be more necessary to keep the couples together. So you can see the one example of the preferences for love marriages versus arranged marriages, and one particular sample of Indian and Pakistani participants, with half saying they would marry someone with desirable qualities, even if they weren't in love, with only about 5% of Americans endorsing that same statement. And kind of the idea here is that because family, these in-groups are so important to each other, the foundation, one of the key important aspects of these marriages that kind of keeps it together is the pressure from these social pressures, really, and these in-group pressures from your in-group, but also your extended family, to keep it together, keep this relationship together. But in the absence of that social pressure from families, romantic love becomes more important as kind of like the glue that binds and maintains that bond between within the relationship. Within arranged marriages, marriage is seen as an intersection of two families, not just two individuals. It might make sense for families to be in a bit better position to make a decision about this likely success of a marriage. Love marriages, on the other hand, consider love a necessity for marriage, more likely in cultures with nuclear family structures, and bound by romantic love in the absence of social pressures from one extended family. This love serves as a glue that maintains the relationships. So, because this marriage and kind of arranged marriage societies, those interconnected, kind of collectivist, interdependent cultures, viewing marriages kind of as similar to other social relationships, and that is that there's a lot of social obligations connected to it, and it's not just kind of two individuals making decision, but rather those individuals kind of being embedded within larger social networks, and thus making a kind of a decision based on multiple people within both social networks. Therefore, it might make sense for family members to be involved in that decision-making process, because they are also affected by that marriage. Arranged marriages may be puzzling to some, particularly to Westerners, because the concept goes against many Western assumptions about love and marriage. The first assumption: people can only love someone that they have chosen for themselves. The second: only individuals themselves can make the best choice for themselves. And third, a marriage that is not built on love will end in misery and will be unhappy or unsuccessful. So, because of kind of or influenced by these three assumptions of love and marriage, kind of relationships that kind of violate those assumptions found in Western society would be thought to just fail in general, and kind of result in less life satisfaction or happiness in general, because of these three assumptions that are thought to be kind of foundational to marriages, within, at least in the Western context, or kind of this Western, I should say, conceptualization of these three fundamental components of marriage. Arranged marriages, however, are often quite successful. Love develops over time even if the individuals haven't chosen the partner. They assume that the family will make the best choice for them. Most people in cultures that practice arranged marriages feel that such an arrangement works. There is a positive correlation between divorce rates and the extent to which a culture emphasizes the importance of love in a marriage. Generally, there is no or little difference between love marriages and arranged marriages in terms of reported marital satisfaction in different cultures. In several societies, men in arranged marriages are more satisfied than women in arranged marriages. Studies find that arranged marriages are at least as happy as love marriages, except for women in China and Japan. Women in Japan and China, for women in Japanese and Chinese arranged marriages, were less satisfied than those in love marriages, suggesting that in those cultures, the costs of arranged marriages may be disproportionately borne largely by women. The idea here is that over time, love can develop within the arranged marriage, and there's not consistent or literal or no difference between self-reported marital satisfaction in different cultures. However, in some studies, there are studies that have found that that women and Japanese and Chinese arranged marriages are reporting less satisfaction than in love marriages, which could just be a particular cultural component within that cultural context of arranged marriages. So you see some differences there, but kind of overall, you can see large cultural variability and just in general, little to no difference in reported marital satisfaction in arranged marriages. And for example, a comparison of marital satisfaction comparing love and arranged marriages indicates that, for both men and women, those in love marriages initially scored higher in marital satisfaction than those in arranged marriages. However, the trend reverses as time goes on. Most arranged marriages end up becoming loving relationships even if they begin without love. Couples in arranged and love marriages have different starting points in their levels of mutual love. So looking back after many years of marriage, it might make sense that those in love marriages, which started out extremely high in romantic love, might love less intensely than when they started out. For those in arranged marriages, who are likely started out with a lower level of love, might have more love for their partner now than they have now that they have spent time together. People in those two types of marriages have different standards of comparison. What we're talking about here is kind of a different reference points. So individuals in arranged marriages may be starting at lower levels, on average, lower levels of love than individuals in love marriages. But through time, kind of that intensity of high romantic love decreasing on average in love marriages, but it increasing in arranged marriages. So kind of, as stated, kind of being through time, love increasing within arranged marriages, but also kind of just different possible comparison points kind of driving this. Because if you ask an individual, how much are you in love compared to the beginning of your relationship, someone who is in a highly intensive love-based relationship has kind of a different reference point. So they might say, oh yeah, I'm definitely less in love than before, or just kind of whatever, just less maybe passionate love, I should say, than before, but compared to arranged marriage, where they can say, where their point of comparison is more likely to say something like, you know, I had less passionate love before, but over time, my passion and love for that individual has increased. So those two different initial reference points may be impacting these results, but also there could be drivers of this phenomenon. In summary, physical attractiveness has universal aspects, particularly for facial features, but the standards for beautiful bodies vary across cultures. People are universally attractive to others whom they interact with frequently, but beyond Western cultures, these people need not necessarily be similar. Relationships everywhere share components from the 4 basic relational models, but the experience of relationships and of types of love and marriage can differ. That's all for this week. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great week. Bye, everyone.